The Subcommittee on Water, Oceans, and Wildlife will come to order. Subcommittee's meeting today to hear testimony on 4 water-related bills. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at the hearing are limited to the chairman and ranking member. This allows us to hear from our witnesses sooner and helps members keep their schedules. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent that all members' opening statements be made part of the record if they're submitted to the clerk by 5 p.m. today or the close of the hearing, whichever comes first. Hearing no objection, that is so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that Representatives Joe Magoosh and Blake Moore join the hearing to ask questions of the witnesses. Hearing no objection, that too is so ordered. Without objection, the chair may declare a recess subject to the call of the chair. As described in the notice, statements, documents, or motions must be submitted to the electronic repository at the following email address: hnrcdocs@mail.house.gov. Additionally, please note that as with our in-person meetings, members are responsible for their own microphones. So just know that you can be muted by staff only to avoid inadvertent background noise. Finally, members or witnesses who experience technical problems should inform committee staff immediately. I will now recognize myself for 5 minutes to make an oral opening statement. So thanks for joining us, everyone. We are here today to consider 4 bills that aim to tackle a variety of water challenges driven by climate change. As we continue to hear in this subcommittee, as scientists have been warning for many years, and as we're seeing with our own eyes, climate change is greatly impacting water supplies for numerous American communities and imperiling our nation's ecosystems. We must advance new tools and investments in climate resilience and adaptation measures, and we'll hear about some of those tools and investments today. The bills before us propose new tools to support reliable, clean drinking water for tribes, increase access to critical climate and water data, and advance collaborative solutions for endangered species recovery in the drought-stricken Upper Colorado Basin. First item on our agenda today is House Resolution 320, sponsored by Representative Joe Magoosh of Colorado. It recognizes the critical importance of access to reliable, clean drinking water for Native Americans and Alaska Natives, and calls on the federal government to take certain actions to ensure basic water services across Indian country. And numerous tribal communities across our country still lack clean, reliable drinking water supplies, even though the federal government has a trust responsibility to ensure the survival and welfare of Indian tribes and people. Despite this, Native American households are still 19 times more likely to lack complete plumbing than white households in the United States. Lack of water has a significant impact on tribal economic development and public health. And we see that in the higher rates of death and hospitalization in Indian country from COVID-19. Clearly, the federal government can and must do better, including by employing a whole of government approach to remove barriers and optimize funding for basic water service. And that's what Resolution 320 calls for. I look forward to continuing discussion on Rep. Magoosh's resolution and how Congress can better support tribal water access. Also from Representative Magoosh, we'll consider H.R. 5001, the Upper Colorado and San Juan River Basins Recovery Act. This bill would reauthorize 2 collaborative programs that help recover 4 endangered species within the Upper Colorado Basin and its largest tributary, the San Juan River. These programs bring together water users, environmental groups, tribes, local utilities, and state and federal agencies to recover endangered fish while continuing to manage water in the Upper Colorado Basin. These recovery programs have resulted in significant progress towards species recovery, including through the removal of non-native species and by providing enhanced flows at key times for the target species. I want to commend Representative Magoosh for his leadership on both of these bills. Next, we'll hear H.R. 4832, sponsored by Representative Susie Lee of Nevada. This is the Open Access Evapotranspiration Data Act. Data on evapotranspiration, or ET, can be used to determine how much water is lost to the atmosphere, and better data on ET helps inform water management and improves climate planning efforts. H.R. 4832 would establish a program within the U.S. Geological Service to provide satellite-based ET information to inform water management. Several witnesses at our recent hearings on Colorado River drought conditions expressed support for these type of efforts, and they noted that ET data is particularly important for improved and transparent monitoring of water use. It's critical to have adequate water data to properly manage our increasingly limited water resources, and so I'm glad to join Representative Lee as a co-sponsor on this important bill. Our final bill today is H.R. 5345, the Saline Lake Ecosystems in the Great Basin States Program Act. That's a mouthful. It's a good bill. I'm proud to sponsor it with Representative Moore of Utah. The longer we serve in Congress, we're all getting a little saltier, as I think Mr. Moore would agree with me. And the same thing is happening with our iconic saline lakes. These lakes in the West are shrinking, becoming saltier because of prolonged drought and other effects of climate change. These shrinking lakes are exposing harmful dust that threatens the public health of neighboring communities. It harms local economies and eliminates essential habitat, including for numerous migratory birds. So this bill, H.R. 5345, directs USGS to establish a program to assess and monitor the hydrology of saline lakes and associated ecosystems in the Great Basin states. This effort will help us better understand how water supplies and habitats are changing, and it'll inform better management actions in response. I want to applaud Representative Moore and the many stakeholders who worked on this collaborative legislation, including the National Audubon Society, which first identified how Western lakes are serving as a vital link in migratory pathways for numerous species. So with that, I look forward to a productive conversation today about each of these bills, and I'll now recognize Representative Benz to say a few words.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I welcome the members and witnesses to today's hearing where we are considering 4 bills. H.R. 5345 by Mr. Moore of Utah would establish a program within the U.S. Geological Survey to assess, monitor, and conserve saline lake ecosystems in the Great Basin region. Saline lakes include Lake Abert in my district in Oregon and the Great Salt Lake in Utah. And I'll assure you, Mr. Chair, as I drive by Lake Abert, it's much more of Puddle Abert now because it's shrinking. I look forward to hearing from the Interior Department and from Utah State Representative Joel Ferry about the need for this legislation. H.R. 4832 by Ms. Lee of Nevada aims to establish an open access evapotranspiration or open ET program within the USGS. I note that an open ET program already exists as it was launched just a few weeks ago through a collaboration with NASA. I also note that this administrative effort and the bill are focused on measuring evapotranspiration from irrigated lands, and that such data would be included in the Bureau of Reclamation's Water Smart grant making process. Since irrigation districts receive Water Smart grants, it begs the question of whether that community has comments on the bill. H.R. 5001 by Mr. Magoosh would extend the Upper Colorado and San Juan recovery implementation programs and reporting requirements for an additional year. These programs have been used to recover 4 endangered fish species on parts of the Colorado River to help keep peace on the river. However, I would note that there have been requests regarding the high overhead and cost of the program and its finality since it has been authorized 5 times since the year 2000. I look forward to hearing from the witnesses on the status of the report to Congress and why the Interior Department is delayed on finishing that report. Lastly, Res 320, also by Mr. Magoosh, is a resolution that expresses the sense of the House of Representatives that access to reliable and clean drinking water is important to the health and welfare of American Indians and Alaska Natives. And I would call out, Mr. Chair, Warm Springs Indian Reservation in my district, where this clean water issue is front and center. So I'm looking forward to a discussion on that bill. In conclusion, I look forward to hearing from the witnesses. However, Mr. Chair, I would be remiss if I did not speak up for the California Republican delegation who have requested that we hold a hearing on Congressman Validado's H.R. 737, the Renew Win Act bill. The same delegation recently requested that you and I hold an oversight hearing on the long-term operations of California's water system in light of the Biden administration's recent proposal to change how that system operates. And I would just mention, Mr. Chair, that as I have before, the incredible damage that has been done by virtue of water shortages and the I'm going to say unbalanced allocation of water in the Central Valley Project. And I want to bring attention, of course, I just looked it up again this morning, to the number of farm workers in the Central Valley, somewhere between 500,000 and 800,000 people who are being harmed by those I'm going to say, unbalanced allocations toward fish as opposed to toward people. I hope you would strongly consider these requests. And with that, I yield back the remainder of my time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the ranking member. We're going to continue to disagree on this notion that fish are somehow getting a windfall allocation of water representing the downstream part of that equation. I can assure you it's pretty bad on that end too, but that conversation will be for another day. We will now begin to hear testimony, starting with the lead sponsors of the bills on today's agenda. Under our committee rules, we ask that witnesses limit oral statements to 5 minutes. Obviously, your entire written statement will appear in the hearing record, so everyone knows this, but when you begin speaking, the timer will start counting down. It'll turn orange when you have 1 minute remaining, and I recommend that members and witnesses use the grid view so that they can lock the timer in their screen and make sure that we follow the timer as it counts down. After testimony is complete, please remember to mute yourself. And when I recognize you, please also remember to unmute yourself so that we can hear you. And we will begin. Is Mr. Magoosh with us yet? I don't believe so. So I think we will begin by hearing from Representative Susie Lee of Nevada, the sponsor of HR 4832, the Open Access ET Data Act. Representative Lee, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Hoffman and Ranking Member Benz, for hosting this legislative hearing on these critically important bills for the health of our environment and water resources, and for once again providing me the chance to participate. And thanks to all of the witnesses ahead of time for your testimony. Southern Nevada, oh, I'm sorry, hold on. I am reading the wrong thing. Southern Nevada and the entire West is facing an unprecedented drought that will require innovative solutions. And in my district, Lake Mead, which provides the water for 25 million people across the West, and California is at its lowest level since the construction of the Hoover Dam in 1930. To help address this crisis and maximize the benefit of our water supplies, first and foremost, we must know how much water is available and how much is being used. And this is where evapotranspiration, or ET, comes in. ET is a measure of the water that is transferred from the land to the atmosphere and represents the largest share of water consumption in the most arid environments around the world. And that's precisely why I introduced HR 4832, the Open Access Evapotranspiration Data Act. It's a tongue twister. I introduced this with Representatives Hoffman and Stewart to implement the Open ET Data Program at the U.S. Geological Survey. The program will use the best available science and publicly available data from multiple satellites and weather stations to provide estimates of ET. This data will support water conservation and management efforts of farmers, ranchers, and water utilities. Through this program, we will democratize access to this information and help level the playing field across all water users. And it will build upon decades of investment by the USGS, NASA, NOAA, and the European Space Agency to develop, launch, and operate a constellation of satellites and ground-based systems, including the launch of Landsat 9 this September. This data is absolutely critical to helping us solve our water and our drought crisis. I'd also like to speak in support of HR 5345, the Saline Lakes Ecosystems in the Great Basin States Program Act of 2021. Along with Representatives Moore, Huffman, Costa, Abernathy, and Thompson, I introduced this bill to establish a scientific monitoring and assessment program to better manage the conservation efforts for saline lakes and the migratory birds they support. These saline lakes in Nevada and across our country are important ecosystems, hubs of industry, and drivers of tourism. But now they are more threatened than ever before by water demands, extreme drought, and climate change. This bill will facilitate regional assessment of saline lake ecosystems that will fill a critical data gap and that has made it challenging so far to address the variety of problems they face. So thank you again, Chair Huffman and Ranking Member Bentz, for hosting this hearing and to discuss these bills that will greatly contribute to the health of our environment and water resources. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Representative Lee. The committee will now hear from Representative Magoosh of Colorado, who is the lead sponsor of both House Resolution 320, recognizing the importance of tribal access to clean water, and HR 5001, the Upper Colorado and San Juan River Basins Recovery Act. Representative Magoosh, welcome. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, Chairman Huffman, and Ranking Member Bentz for considering two pieces of my legislation in this hearing today, as the chairman mentioned, and for giving me the opportunity to testify on those bills. I was proud to introduce HR 5001 and HR Res 320, two bills of great importance to communities in my state of Colorado and the Rocky Mountain West. HR 5001 would reauthorize and extend critical endangered fish recovery programs in the Upper Colorado and San Juan River basins. That includes Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming. The Upper Colorado River Endangered Fish Recovery Program was first established in 1988 to help bring 4 species of endangered fish back from the brink of extinction: the humpback chub, bonytail, Colorado picamino, and razorback sucker, while continuing existing water development. This program is a unique collaboration that brings together many different parties: local, state, tribal, federal agencies, water and power interests, and environmental groups, who all work together to recover endangered fish in the basin. The San Juan River Basin Recovery Implementation Program was established in 1992 and is similarly working to protect a variety of different species within the San Juan River sub-basin within the Upper Colorado River Basin. These programs have become national models for their collaborative conservation efforts to protect endangered species, and for good reason. Just last month, the humpback chub, one of the endangered species in the Upper Colorado River Basin, was moved from endangered to threatened status due to many, many years of effort from this partnership to restore the habitat and the conditions for the species. The bill would reauthorize the programs through 2024 and extend current reporting deadlines for the recovery programs in response to the challenges faced by the recovery program partners due to the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm proud that the bill has garnered bipartisan support from colleagues in the Upper Colorado Basin and from recovery partners working on these collaborative efforts. Next, I'd like to turn to HR Res 320, a resolution reaffirming the importance of tribal access to clean drinking water. Lack of access to clean drinking water is a significant barrier for many Indigenous communities. The Indian Health Service reports that nearly half of Native American households don't have access to reliable water sources and clean drinking water, which is truly unacceptable. Lacking access to clean drinking water has significant impacts on the health, education, economic development, and other aspects of daily life for those living in these communities. Without consistent access to clean water, communities are at greater risk for contracting and spreading COVID-19 and other infectious diseases. Tribal communities have been hit especially hard during this pandemic, and the federal government has to provide more support to these communities to improve water conditions. My resolution reaffirms the federal government's commitment to provide clean drinking water for Indigenous communities and calls on the federal government to pursue a whole-of-government approach in collaboration with tribal governments to ensure the provision of reliable access to clean water in Indigenous communities. I was so proud to have you join me as a co-lead on this important resolution, Chairman Huffman, and for your leadership in this regard, and to have also partnered with Senator Michael Bennet, my colleague in Colorado, who introduced a companion resolution in the Senate. I'm also thankful for the Colorado River Water and Tribes Initiative for their recently issued report that outlines the extent of this crisis and the recommendations for improving federal programs designed to address this problem. Lastly, I want to would ask unanimous consent, rather, to enter into the record 17 letters of support for HR 5001 from water users, partners, local communities. Also would like to enter into the record written testimony from the Western States Water Council on each of the bills in the hearing today. And again, I want to say thank you to the chairman for allowing me to testify on these two bills. And of course, many thanks to the wonderful witnesses who have agreed to testify in front of the committee today. With that, I would yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Magoosh. Glad to be working with you on both of these bills. And to the cold water fishermen in Northern California who worry that I'm supporting a bill that helps pike minnow, just to be clear, this is the upper Colorado River Basin where they're native, and we want to make sure they are recovered. They're less popular in the trout and salmon streams of Northern California. But thank you for your good work here. We will next hear from Representative Blake Moore of Utah, who has led a charmed life since he came to Congress. In the congressional baseball game, I'm not even making this up. At his first at bat, he hit an inside the park home run. I like Mr. Moore, but as the first baseman for the Democrats, I saw way too much of him passing through first base over the course of that evening. But he's here before us, continuing his charmed congressional life with a legislative hearing in his freshman year on an important bill. That's because it's a very good bill. So welcome, Mr. Moore. We're happy to hear from you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Rep. Hoffman. It wasn't as charmed in the football game last night against the much more athletic Capitol Police. So it's better when Republicans and Democrats play against each other and we don't bring in more talent like we had to play last night in the football game. So, but we're going to forget that and we'll move right into what really matters, is like what you mentioned, this important piece of legislation. And before my comments at the end get drowned out, this is something that matters to people. This matters to my home state. And the willingness of Rep. Huffman to co-lead this with me just shows that Congress can work together. And I think these kind of things matter, and it's very, very important. So a brief thank you to Chairman Grijalva and Ranking Member Westerman and their staffs for helping us get to this point, and for Chair Huffman and Ranking Member Bentz for holding the hearing today, and for the opportunity to testify on this bipartisan legislation, the Saline Lake Ecosystems in the Great Basin States Program Act. We need to come up with a catchy little acronym for this one, but it's saline lake, terminal lakes that exist throughout the Great Basin, and providing and having the federal government be able to take a strong look and a scientific look at what needs to be done. The Great Basin region of the Western United States is home to many saline lake and wetland systems. These terminal lakes feature a high concentration of salt and other minerals, which produces a favorable environment for wildlife and the surrounding communities. In Utah, the Great Salt Lake generates more than $1.32 billion of economic output each year. We see the effect of this in our recreation, tourism, and our business industries. We also see these benefits in our wildlife habitats, which are ideal for migratory birds, brine shrimp, and more. The environment and economies of states with saline lakes depend on their health and well-being. Each year, millions of birds take advantage of this ecological network, replenishing critical fat reserves before continuing their migratory journey. No other ecosystem in the West is capable of supporting such a large influx of passing shore and water birds. Importantly, these saline lakes also insulate surrounding communities from windborne dust, a public health hazard that can contain microbes and toxins that carry disease. Unfortunately, the threat to our saline lake ecosystems has grown in recent years. Terrible droughts that have ravaged the West, dramatically reducing habitats, water viability, and the many industries that rely upon them. Though many saline lakes have freshwater inputs, they cannot compete with evaporation, diversion, and increased water demand from expanding populations. In Utah, this is an acute concern. According to the 2020 census, Utah was the fastest growing state in the nation. Our population is set to double, is on track to double by 2050. We also recognize the detrimental impact these trends have on our summer and winter recreation industries, which inject billions of dollars into the economy of these drought-impacted states. Also, the location of the world's best Winter Olympics that we've ever had, that we want to get back again to. That's not a biased view. I think that's very, very objective, that we are the best place for the Winter Olympics. The Saline Lakes Ecosystem in the Great Basin State Program Act would be the first step toward a long-term solution. If passed, H.R. 5345 would authorize the Director of the United States Geological Survey to implement a program to assess and monitor the hydrology of saline lakes in the Great Basin. This 5-year program would provide the necessary resources for a scientific and technical study of saline wetland systems The USGS is uniquely qualified to bridge the intersection between our needs and our environment's needs. The ecosystem, the Saline Lakes Bill will focus primarily on a subset of key saline water systems in Utah, Oregon, California, and Nevada. From there, USGS will work closely with federal and state agencies and local stakeholders to ensure that current water demands are met while planning for the future. Beginning this research now is a critically important step to ensuring that our communities and habitats are resilient. As someone who has heard about these challenges from countless Utahns, one of whom is here today to testify, and witnesses these changes firsthand, I urge my colleagues to support this important bill. I can't emphasize this enough, how much I've heard from our local stakeholders in Utah, from the state legislature to farmers across the board, of the concern for this. And I'm sincerely grateful for, as I mentioned before, Chair Huffman, who is co-leading the bill, and Representatives Lee, Thompson, Obernolte, and Costa for their support. This type of bipartisan work matters, and it's great for, I know, at least my local stakeholders to see Congress being able to come together. Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing me to be here today, and I'll yield back my 6 seconds.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moore. Thanks to all the members who joined us to testify today. We will now transition to our second panel. Before I introduce witnesses for the second panel, I'll remind non-administration witnesses that they are encouraged to participate in the witness diversity survey that we've created through the Congressional Office of Diversity and Inclusion. The witnesses may refer to their hearing invitation materials for more information about that. And I remind each of our witnesses, so when I recognize you, please unmute yourself so we can jump right into your testimony. And then please remember to mute yourself after you're through. We want to avoid any inadvertent background noise. And I will allow the witnesses to finish their testimony before we bring it back to members for questions. We'll begin with Ms. Tanya Trujillo, Assistant Secretary for Water and Science at the Department of Interior. The chair now recognizes Ms. Trujillo to testify for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. I am Tanya Trujillo, the Assistant Secretary for Water and Science at the Department of the Interior. Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify. The 4 bills that are before the committee today provide opportunities to highlight some of the important programs we are working on at the Department of the Interior. Those programs help us to address the water management challenges we are facing today. We support the bills and are looking forward to working with the committee on technical amendments that may help with respect to implementation of the programs that are under consideration. I want to compliment Representative Magoosh and the other sponsors for introducing House Resolution 320 that recognizes that providing access to reliable, clean drinking water is an essential human need tied to public health and the well-being of every community. Access to reliable, clean drinking water has long been a significant challenge in many tribal communities and in many Alaska Native villages. The Department of the Interior supports continued efforts to increase access to drinking water for tribal communities through some of our existing programs, such as the Rural Water Program, implementation of Indian water rights settlements, and technical assistance to tribes programs. We look forward to continued collaboration with our tribal and federal partners to make progress on these important mission. Shifting to the issues relating to H.R. 5001, the Upper Colorado River Recovery Program and the San Juan River Basin Recovery Program have been in place for approximately 4 decades. I have personally worked on those programs, and they have provided ESA compliance coverage for more than 2,500 federal and non-federal water projects in the Upper Colorado River Basin and the San Juan River Basin. The recovery programs provide regulatory certainty for the farmers and communities that rely on the water, and provide a forum for federal, state, tribal, and local collaboration efforts regarding the needs of the species involved in the programs. As an example, as was mentioned, as an example of the recent success of the programs, the Fish and Wildlife Service recently reclassified the humpback chub from endangered to threatened, and is proposing a similar reclassification for the razorback sucker. H.R. 5001 extends the authority for the recovery programs through 2024. The administration supports this reauthorization, and we look forward to continuing to work with the program managers and the interested parties to ensure the longevity of these important programs. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, underlying much of our work on water management issues throughout the country is the need to rely on the best available science to help inform our collective decision-making. The USGS is working to improve our water supply prediction and assessment capabilities across the nation, and that includes the ability to gain an increased understanding of evapotranspiration rates. Accurately reporting and predicting the consumptive use of water through evapotranspiration methods is a very valuable tool for water resource managers. Ongoing collaborative research efforts have successfully developed a prototype project called OpenET. That project is capable of providing daily evapotranspiration data for irrigated lands in areas around the western United States. We are looking forward to continuing to expand upon the current pilot programs, and to use those projects to increase the accuracy and geographic scope of the program to cover more areas in the eastern U.S. H.R. 4832 would authorize an OpenET program at USGS. We are supportive of expanding the current OpenET capabilities so that they can be applied on a nationwide scale, but we would like to work with you at the committee to suggest some specifications for the program to ensure that we can responsibly plan and expand upon our current efforts. H.R. 5345 addresses another challenging area facing water resource managers in the Great Basin region of the United States that we just heard about. The saline lakes in the Great Basin and their associated wetlands support an important network of habitat for migratory birds and other species. As was noted, Utah's Great Salt Lake provides critical habitat for millions of migratory birds and generates significant revenue annually from recreation activities and industry. But climate change and reduced river inflows have decreased the lake's volumes and other lakes, as was noted in the Oregon context, by significant levels. H.R. 5345 would authorize the Secretary of the Interior, acting through the USGS, to establish an ecosystem assessment and monitoring program to assess and monitor the hydrology of the saline lake ecosystems in the Great Basin. As was noted, USGS is uniquely suited for this work through its Integrated Water Availability Assessment Program. The expansion of the program in the Great Basin would help to build the scientific foundation needed in this area. USGS is committed to collecting the required data and conducting the necessary assessments to inform our ongoing management and conservation actions. All four of the bills discussed today recognize important priorities for our administration. We look forward to working with the committee on these bills and additional legislation to help us continue to manage our natural resources effectively in the face of our changing climate. Thank you very much, and I would look forward to answering questions.
Thank you, Assistant Secretary Trujillo. The committee will next hear from Ms. Becker, Associate Attorney for the Navajo Tribal Utility Authority. Ms. Becker, you're recognized.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Hoffman. Ranking Member Bentz and members of this esteemed subcommittee, thank you for the invitation to testify on House Resolution 320 and 5001. As Chairman said, my name is Bitta Becker, and I'm an attorney for the Navajo Tribal Utility Authority, or as we call it, NTUA. NTUA is a not-for-profit enterprise wholly owned by the Navajo Nation, and it provides 6 utility services. The Navajo Nation is about the size of West Virginia, and it's located in the heart of the Colorado River in the basin in the Four Corners region of the United States. NTUA supports both 320 and 5001 because they support policies and programs that are critical to protecting the health and welfare of the Navajo people. 320 is important because the federal responsibility to ensure that all tribal communities have clean water to drink cannot be overemphasized at any point, but especially at this moment in time. The pandemic has shined a light on the longstanding inequity of the lack of access to safe drinking water in tribal communities. It is estimated that 30 to 40% of the homes on the Navajo Nation do not have running water. And Representative Bentz, my understanding is Warm Springs system suffers because their pipes are still made of clay and wood to this day. According to the Centers for Disease Control, American Indians and Alaska Natives are more likely than any other ethnic or racial group to be hospitalized or die from COVID-19 today. During the pre-vaccine days of the pandemic, American Indians and Alaska Natives contracted COVID-19 at the highest rates of any racial or ethnic group. This is related because researchers early in the pandemic determined that one of the major factors that contributed to the high rates of COVID-19 in Indian country was the lack of plumbing in homes for clean drinking water. Now, all of that being recognized, now is the time to address this longstanding inequity, and HR 320 encourages a solution through a whole of government approach. And today's testimony from the Department of Interior supporting a whole of government approach and the written testimony supporting the Tribal Infrastructure Task Force, which is led by EPA, is so encouraging. Another key federal agency that is part of this task force is the Indian Health Service. In 1959, Congress created the Indian Health Service Sanitation Facilities Construction Program specifically to address the lack of clean drinking water to Indian homes and the lack of wastewater services. Now, in addition to the whole of government, we need funding. And this Congress stands poised to be the first Congress ever to fully fund the Indian Health Service Sanitation Facilities Construction Program through the proposed Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. NTUA and many of us cheer you on as you continue to deliberate this and other important bills. Concerning 501, or 5001, excuse me, federal investment in the Upper Colorado and San Juan River Basins recovery programs is utmost important to NTUA, the Navajo Nation, and the Navajo people, because it has the effect of protecting the San Juan River and the entire Colorado River system. The San Juan River, the Colorado River, and two other rivers surround and protect the Navajo Nation. Each of these rivers are mentioned in Navajo songs, prayers, are part of the development of the Navajo people. The San Juan River Recovery Program is designed to recover the Colorado pike minnow and razorback sucker. By protecting these fish, the ultimate effect is protecting the health of the river so that the river continues to be a trusted source of tradition and culture and therefore supports the health and well-being of the Navajo people. The San Juan River is an important source of reliable water to serve the drinking water needs of the nation. In addition, the Navajo Nation Department of Fish and Wildlife is an integral participant in the San Juan River Recovery Program, along with state and local partners. They are so proud of their work in this program. They operate and maintain 3 grow-out ponds of razorback suckers, and they report that 2020 was the best return rate for these fish at 82.5%. NTUA also relies on hydropower from both the Colorado River Storage Project Act and Hoover Dam for Navajo Nation on-power uses. These are critical non-carbon emitting power sources that help keep electric rates as low as possible for one of the more impoverished communities. NTUA supports 320 and 5001 and stands ready to support the federal investments in wastewater infrastructure on the nation. Thank you so much.
Ms. Becker, thank you very much. I want to remind members of the committee that under Rule 3D, there's a 5-minute limit on questions, and we will now bring it back to the members for questions. I'll start by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. And Ms. Trujillo, I'd like to begin with you on HR 4832, the Open ET data legislation. You have testified before this subcommittee last month about Interior's response to severe drought in the Colorado Basin. And across the Western United States. And we've heard time and again that an open ET tool, such as the one proposed in this legislation, is critically important. I've been around water managers for many, many years, and there's sort of a saying that you can't manage it if you can't measure it. And this tool is one of the most important steps to doing that. Your testimony notes that accurate ET consumptive water use through ET data is one of the biggest data gaps that we have in water management in the West, and that this would help close the data gap. Could you just expand a little bit on how the Open ET data program led by USGS will help close that data gap and why that's such a critical response to the drought we're currently facing and future droughts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for recognizing that it is a very important component. The evapotranspiration rates are a very important component of the water budget. And that is exactly why we need to continue to improve upon the existing measurement capabilities that we do have. Many of the states around the West utilize this data to help with respect to their management efforts. Many of the collaborative programs we're involved in that involve water and species analysis use this data. It is one of the many tools that the USGS experts are continuing to utilize and improve upon as we continue our missions. Thank you.
Want to ask how you would prioritize generating and distributing this ET data. Would you begin in the areas where they're experiencing the most severe drought challenges, for example?
That's a great question, Mr. Chairman. I think the plan would be to try to work with the partners to establish those priority areas. We do have some excellent pilots going in the Western US. I think one of the main questions is how we expand it to other portions of the East. And those areas are challenging because we have more trees and more humidity, but we're trying to think through exactly how to do those expansion efforts. I think using it with respect to drought management operations is very, very important.
With respect to House Resolution 320, of course, that's calling for a whole of government approach for ensuring reliable, clean drinking water for Alaska Native villages and tribal communities. Could you describe what steps are already underway at Interior to meet that directive and perhaps how those can be accelerated or even enhanced?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. That is a very high priority for our department and our administration. And I'm honored to be here today testifying along with Becker from the Navajo Nation. We have worked together on this project for many years. At Interior, we already have tribal water resource programs. We have Indian water rights settlement implementations. We have technical assistance to tribes, in particular in areas where drought is a concern. But we are looking forward to having additional resources to apply to these measures and to work collaboratively with the other federal agencies. As Ms. Becker noted, we have over 7 different agencies with this essential mission. We're trying to coordinate our efforts so that we can be as effective as possible.
Thank you for that. And Ms. Becker, let me turn to you and ask you to elaborate a little on the legal context for this conversation and why securing water access for tribes is actually a legal responsibility of the federal government. I think it's important as we consider this subject to understand that important context.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. The United States entered into treaties with many tribes, including the Navajo Nation, and those treaties are promises to create a permanent homeland for the tribal people living on them. And that's one of other legal bases. I would also suggest that when Congress created the Indian Health Service program in 1959, Congress was recognizing their legal obligation then as well.
Thank you for that. I'll yield the balance of my time and turn to Ranking Member Benz for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Trujillo, a couple of questions about the get the right name for it here, simplified surface energy balance operational model, or the open ET as it's been referred to. There's folks for years in the water irrigation space have been concerned about Big Brother peering down and figuring out what and how much water they were using or might be using. And how would you anticipate the utilization of the data that's created by virtue of this new device? And how would you avoid the very likely thought that folks are going to say, hey, big government is now spying on us and going to be coming out and telling us when to turn our yard sprinklers off? or whatever. So just share with me how that data is going to be used.
Thank you, Representative Bentz. Maybe I'll start out by saying the technology is not new technology. We have been relying on satellite programs, Earth observation programs for over 50 years in the context of the Landsat program that I've testified before about. And I think the new elements of this program are that we are continuing to expand upon the level of collaboration that exists with respect to how to utilize this type of data. The evapotranspiration data is one of several different tools that exist to help water managers get an idea of what the uses are in their respective states. And there are a lot of different ways to utilize and apply that information back to the folks on the ground that are using it. They can use it for regulatory issues, but also just general planning and estimates of how much water may be available in an annual year in particular areas. So there's a variety of uses for it, and it is not a new system that's coming into place.
I guess the question is one. Let's go back to where you plan on utilizing it. Is my vision of this incorrect when I assume that its focus will primarily be upon the projects that you oversee in the irrigation areas, as opposed to determining how much water might be coming off a watershed? I mean, watersheds, at least many of them in my part of the world, are covered with trees. It makes it very difficult. So is my assumption incorrect that this primary focus of this device, this model, is going to be on irrigated agriculture?
Congressman, the program is designed to develop data that will represent the entire surface of the earth, whether it be agricultural use or forest use or watershed uses. It's not designed to segregate one use as opposed to other uses. And it's publicly available. So it's data that can be used in any of the sectors that are covered by the information.
And I'm fine with that. I guess I better ask what your department plans on doing with this data. Do you have any plans for its use other than merely advising on where the water might be? Is there any regulatory aspect to its future use, or is it just merely, wow, this is sure interesting?
Both. The data is gathered and developed along with many types of programs that we have to be able to participate in discussions with others about how the water balance works, but I am not aware of any regulatory plans to utilize this water from the Department of the Interior. State water managers are the ones that are probably thinking about how to use the information to allocate water or distribute water. And it's one of many tools, again, that they have available.
There's been some discussion about better tools to measure the water that we're going to have available, and one of the more interesting ones has been measuring the dryness of the soil that covers our watersheds. Would this be of any help in that space? In other words, does this technology lend itself to measuring how dry our soil is?
The USGS has numerous programs that evaluate all kinds of those science inputs, including soil moistures, including evapotranspiration rates, including stream gauge, stream system rates. And I think the balance of it is creating a better picture overall of how the systems operate. I think even in the Klamath area in Oregon, we are undertaking some programs with the local managers to use the evapotranspiration data, use the open ET data to help with respect to some of those water quality and water quantity programs. So I think the soil moisture is an important component of that equation.
Thank you so much. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ranking Member Benz. Next, the committee will recognize Congressman Ed Case from Hawaii, who will probably remind us that his district is surrounded by the largest saline lake in the world.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Among other things, I was prepared to remind you of a fair number of things. However, today, apropos of your comment, Ms. Trujillo, I do want to remind this subcommittee of the indigenous peoples of our country whose origins lie in Hawaii, the Native Hawaiians. I have read, of course, this resolution. I support this resolution, but it makes no mention of Native Hawaiians. Native Hawaiians are the indigenous peoples of our country, recognized as such. Over 150 federal statutes over the years, 100 years plus of statutory action, explicit recognition of a special trust relationship with Native Hawaiians. Native Hawaiians lack meaningful infrastructure, along with every other indigenous peoples throughout our country. American Indians, Alaska Natives are our brothers and sisters, and I'm grateful to this committee and to this subcommittee for recognizing that fact over a long period of time. However, in all honesty, I am concerned that there is no apparent recognition of Native Hawaiians in this resolution, and I've discussed this with the principal introducer of this resolution, and appreciate his willingness to incorporate that concern. But I do want to ask you whether you also recognize that Native Hawaiians, as indigenous peoples of our country, are also entitled to access to reliable and clean drinking water as an essential, human need and critical component, and that the administration understands that obligation is also one that is owed to all Native peoples of our country, not just American Indians and Alaska Natives. So first of all, can I ask you to comment on that?
Thank you, Representative Case. I would absolutely agree that then the citizens of Alaska are all entitled to those basic needs as well. And I support any efforts to try to expand the authorities or modify the resolution that makes that clear.
Okay, well, there's an old saying in my other profession of being a lawyer, and that is when you get the answer you want, you stop at that point. So, by the way, you said citizens of Alaska, and I think you meant
Hawaii.
I think you meant Native Hawaiians, who, by the way, do not only live in the state of Hawaii. They are residents of all throughout our country and have the same needs throughout our country. So, appreciate your answer, and look forward to working with you on it.
Forgive me for that oversight. And I was going to acknowledge that I have the great privilege of working with several folks from the USGS science centers in Hawaii, and am very impressed with all of the capabilities that they have undertaken there.
Thank you so much. We look forward to working with you across a broad range of issues having to do with Native Hawaiians in Hawaii. But I appreciate your response, and I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Case. We'll next hear from the gentleman from Idaho, Representative Fulcher. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have any questions at this time. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Ranking Member Benz, I had wanted to go to your side of the aisle next, so I think that takes me to Representative Moore, if he's ready.
I'm always ready.
Oh, yeah, I know. You hit an inside the park home run at your first
I'm always
at-bat.
ready. First pitch. I'm always ready. Thank you, Ms. Trujillo. My questions, I have a few questions for you as well. And thanks for joining today, and appreciate your testimonies on these bills. Does the excuse me, does the USGS have a formal definition for which states are encompassed within the Great Basin? And even in addition to that, like about which saline lakes are encompassed in that Great Basin?
Thank you, Representative Moore. And I'm a big baseball fan, so congratulations on your efforts there. But the USGS does have a definition of the Great Basin. I think it is, it does encompass a geographical scope that extends through several of the states in the region. And I'm sorry, I forgot the other part of the question.
Just, is there a clear definition on which saline lakes are also considered for that?
I believe that is the answer is yes as well. They have documented the extent of the water resources within the basin. I think that's, if there is room for improvement there, I'm sure they will be able to highlight that for me if we need more information about it.
Awesome. We can reach out separately just to get a clear definition of that as we
You bet.
continue to navigate this. Because one aspect of the Saline Lakes bill is there are X number of there's several lakes. Some vary in size and scope and immediate need. And so where the resource is going to go to certain areas. And so that'll be an important part to navigate. But I think more importantly, what about a baseline for what USGS is already doing as it relates to monitoring these lakes or others like them? Like what is the USGS currently doing, just giving us a general sense for the baseline of what's going on? At that point, we can know what this study would ultimately try to accomplish above and beyond what's already taking place.
They do have significant programs already in place in measuring and allocating data assessing the data associated with water quality and water quantity inputs. So as I understand the plan for this program, it would be to expand upon those existing programs. I think the question may be related to how to better communicate the information that they have available and make sure that we're receiving good inputs from the partners and then being able to explain it out to interested stakeholders in the area. That's my understanding of what we're going to be working on.
You hit the concept of stakeholders is the key part here, and actually, my last question is something that I think is we held Senator Romney and I held we joined a hearing yesterday back in Utah for the Great Salt Lake Council. So it's a group of stakeholders that the governor has put together to evaluate this and really put a strong focus on it. Why I have so much confidence in pushing this as hard as we can is because there's a lot of questions on how will this study work with and engage these stakeholders. My question here is, have we done something like this before? Has USGS done something like this before that can give us a sort of precedent on what's been successful, what's been difficult in the past? Because the bill, it lays out that USGS will work with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and other federal, tribal, state, and local government stakeholders, as well as research universities, nonprofit organizations, and other partners to design the assessment program. But that's a lot of people and a lot of, could potentially be conflicting sort of perspectives. Do you have an example for us, or was there been any precedent on how this has been successful in the past?
Thank you, Representative Warren. I work very closely with a lot of the water managers there in Utah, and I have a strong connection in particular with the Central Utah Project folks that's directly under my office. I think one of the good examples I would point to is in the Colorado River Basin, where we have utilized USGS science and research capabilities, strongly coordinating with the other federal agencies, but also with the state, tribal, and local entities. The Grand Canyon Research Monitoring Program is a great example, and that is one that, depending on how the local entities there in Utah might want to pull things together, we could build upon some of our other successes.
Yeah, well, just know that you have very interested stakeholders in Utah willing to engage on this, and it's an important issue. So thank you. I yield none of my time back because I don't have any more time.
Thank you. I look forward to working with you and your constituents on these issues.
Thank you, Ms. Trio.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Soto.
Thank you, Chairman. Representing the Sunshine State, Florida itself has water challenges. I know we've talked quite a bit about the West, protecting water quality from over-nutrients, stopping invasive species, plants especially like hydrilla, and ensuring that we replenish our Floridan aquifer, our primary water supply. I'm working with members of this committee on the Natural Resources Committee to protect key watersheds like the Kissimmee River that flows through our district. We spent nearly $1 billion restoring it after it was unfortunately channelized decades ago, wreaking havoc on our water supply and ecosystems. The bill would protect the Kissimmee River by making it a wild and scenic river. This is important to Central Florida and to South Florida water supply for residents and local ranchers, protect wildlife habitat, and cleaning water going into the Everglades. Of course, the Everglades is the main water supply and the home of the Seminole tribe and the Miccosukee tribe, which is why I'm interested in HRS 320, because it recognizes the importance of access to reliable, clean drinking water for Native Americans, Alaskan natives, and of course, we'll be adding in Hawaiian natives as well, and confirming the responsibility of the federal government to ensure such water access. Secretary Trujillo, why is it so important that we pass HRS 320?
Representative, I think many of the points you raised, I would agree with wholeheartedly. And I have the privilege of working very closely with my counterpart, Shannon Estenos from the Fish and Wildlife Service, and who reminds me all the time about the great state of Florida. I think the populations, Native American populations throughout our country are very well positioned to try to have relief in these efforts. And Ms. Becker, again, is a great representative on these issues as well. But we will be happy to work with communities, Native American communities in all of the states and in Hawaii and Alaska, so that we can ensure that these basic human rights can be met. And I want to, again, emphasize the fact that we're working closely with other federal agencies who have responsibilities that we can partner with, so that we can make sure we are as effective as possible in meeting the needs of those various communities. But our Secretary at Interior is definitely committed to these issues, and I'm happy to be part of the team supporting them as well.
And Secretary Trujillo, this is a resolution, but beyond recognitions, what substantive steps do you believe we still need to make by law to protect Native American water rights?
That's a broad question. I can give you a couple of examples that might apply. I think the protection of Native American water rights probably varies from state to state. So from Eastern perspective, I think that basic drinking water supply question is a good area of focus. In the West, we have needs to continue to develop the appropriation and adjudication processes that are underway in several of the states. It is a high priority for us, and we're happy to work with Congress and our partners in the states on the best way to help our tribes. The leadership that we have in the tribal communities around the country is excellent. We have good partners throughout
Thank you.
the nation.
And Attorney Becker, what do you believe are the next substantive steps beyond a resolution to protect Native American water rights?
Funding is critical. In addition to that, the continued work that the agencies are doing to revive the important work of the Tribal Infrastructure Work Group. I can't underestimate the importance of funding, which this Congress already recognizes. Infrastructure goes hand in hand with water and protecting water rights.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thanks very much, Mr. Soto. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from New Mexico, Ms. Stansbury, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for convening this important hearing this morning. And thank you to Representatives Magoosh, Lee, Moore, and others for introducing this important legislation. Of course, we are very proud of our New Mexicans who are here today joining us. It's wonderful to see our Assistant Secretary, Ms. Tanya Trujillo again, and of course, Bita, Ms. Becker, it's wonderful to have you here today as well. We're so proud to have you serving the Navajo Nation as well as the state of New Mexico as the Vice Chair of the New Mexico Interstate Stream Commission. As I'm sure has been discussed much here this morning, New Mexico, like so many of our tribal communities, face severe water shortages across the state, and many of our communities do not have access to safe drinking water. It is unconscionable that in one of the wealthiest nations in the world, that many of our communities and our homes still do not have access to safe drinking water and sanitation. Ms. Becker, earlier this year, you testified that nearly a third of households in Native communities across the U.S. do not have reliable water and sanitation services. which is 400,000 Indigenous members of our communities whose health, education, economic development, and other just basic household needs are impacted by this basic quality of life and human rights issue. I believe that the federal government has a fundamental trust and treaty responsibility and a moral obligation to address this issue urgently now, and to invest in the infrastructure and the resources and technical assistance to address these issues across our communities. This includes investing in the Indian Health Service and investing in EPA programs that serve our tribes, and of course in the Bureau of Reclamation, which the Department of Interior oversees. This is especially urgent in the trujillo community, which is a chapter of the Navajo Nation in my district back in New Mexico, and the painful situation on the ground where we have an entire community that does not have access to safe drinking water. And a number of the families that live in trujillo are having to haul water from Albuquerque and elsewhere because of corroded pipes and a well that is pulling water out of the ground that is not safe for our communities to be drinking. So it's absolutely urgent that we address these issues. It's impacting families, children. It's hard to even imagine for many people in America that we have communities where when they turn on their tap, there is water coming out that is filled with rust and toxins, and in some cases in our Dene communities, uranium and other dangerous constituents. And that there are thousands of families that literally have to drive, in some cases, hundreds of miles to bring water back for drinking, for showering, for providing water for livestock and other household uses. So it's urgent that we address this issue. The Build Back Better Act and the Infrastructure Acts that we're hopefully going to pass in the next 2 days will help to bring a lot of money to help address these issues. But we also have to finish this Navajo-Gallup pipeline project so that we can get the large trunk line infrastructure in place. And then we need desperately to fund the infrastructure that will get those pipelines to the individual households so that people have access to water in their homes. Water is a basic human right, and it's crucial to the economic well-being, the health, and just the general well-being of people in our communities. And so with my remaining time, I'd like to ask Ms. Becker if you could share more about what life is like on the ground for our families, especially out in the Dene chapters where people are living without water in their homes. What is water hauling like? How does it affect people? And what does that look like? Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Stansbury. I think what a lot of people don't realize is that hauling water is the single most expensive form of water one can obtain and utilize. And we're already talking about families who suffer some of the highest rates of poverty in the country. So one of the stories I tell is that on the weekends, when people come into the border towns to do the grocery store shopping, to meet basic needs, or they do their laundry, they wash their car, the lines to the bathrooms will be very long because it's the only time you have to go to a flushable bathroom and wash your hands with running water. I think the other thing I want to offer is sometimes we don't realize that these are our neighbors. The community that you're talking about, trujillo, was significant in the show Breaking Bad, and that might give people some perspective on who we're talking about.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm so glad that you emphasized that. Albuquerque is the largest metropolitan area in the state of New Mexico, and the trujillo chapter is only a half an hour drive from downtown Albuquerque. So we have a community where people do not have safe drinking water in their homes, a half an hour from our largest metropolitan area. And that is so absolutely unconscionable. And that is why it is crucial that we get funding put into place to help these communities. So I really appreciate you all for your testimony today and for working on these issues and dedicating your lifetime to working on these issues. Thank you.
Gentlelady yields. I thank her for those questions and comments, and let me thank Assistant Secretary Trujillo and Ms. Becker for testifying before us. We'll now move to the third and final panel of witnesses. Again, I'll remind the witnesses to please unmute yourself when I recognize you, and then please do mute yourself again when you're done speaking to avoid inadvertent background noise. We will allow the witnesses to finish their testimony before bringing it back to the members for questions. So our final panel will begin with Ms. Rebecca Mitchell, the Director of the Colorado Water Conservation Board. The chair now recognizes Ms. Mitchell for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Huffman, Ranking Member Bentz, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of House Resolution 5001, the Upper Colorado and San Juan River Basins Recovery Act, and House Resolution 320, seeking clean drinking water access for tribal communities. My name is Becky Mitchell, and I serve as the Director of the Colorado Water Conservation Board. First, I want to express support for House Resolution 320 and would like to emphasize the importance of access to reliable, clean drinking water for Native Americans, Alaska Native villages, and now Native Hawaiians across the country. I'm proud to have worked on the Universal Access for Clean Water for Tribes initiative, recognizing access to clean water as an urgent matter and supporting efforts to immediately address the critical infrastructure needs of the tribes and Alaska Native villages. The ongoing COVID-19 pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on tribal communities due to factors including economic disadvantages on federal reservations and in Alaska Native villages, and lack of public health infrastructure, including access to running water. I appreciate the resolution's acknowledgement of the trust responsibility of the federal government to ensure the survival and welfare of federally recognized Indian tribes and Alaska Native communities, and the calls on federal agencies and tribal governments to coordinate and work collaboratively with appropriate state and local jurisdictions to establish expedited planning, design, development, and operation of infrastructure necessary to provide reliable, affordable, and clean drinking water for federally recognized Indian tribes and Alaska Native communities in accordance with applicable law. Secondly, today, on behalf of the state of Colorado, I'm asking members of the subcommittee and Congress to support House Resolution 5001, which proposes technical amendments to the Upper Colorado and San Juan River Basins Recovery Act to keep the recovery programs running smoothly. And I thank you to Congressman Magoosh for his leadership on pursuing this legislation. Congress first authorized these recovery programs in 2000. Since the inception of these programs, Congress has reauthorized the recovery programs through bipartisan supported bills 5 times, affirming the continued need for these critical programs. It is needed to continue these normal operations of the recovery programs and allow time for partners to determine what a longer-term authorization proposal would look like in the upcoming years. With support of this subcommittee, we are eager to continue the good work of the recovery programs so we can continue to make progress on recovering the 4 threatened and endangered Colorado River fish species. In 1987, 4 native Colorado fish species were in dramatic decline. 1, the razorback sucker, was facing possible extinction because only aging adults were being captured and successful reproduction in the wild had not been documented. The second fish species, the humpback jub, had declined dramatically in range and abundance and was considered seriously imperiled. As a response, partners came together to establish the programs to protect these dying species. For 30 years now, the programs have brought together stakeholders for 2 reasons: to recover those fish and to provide endangered species compliance for 2,500 water projects in the Colorado River Basin. Actions taken by these recovery programs provide Endangered Species Act compliance in Colorado and every major Bureau of Reclamation project upstream of Lake Powell, providing essential water supplies for the Upper Colorado and San Juan River basins. Importantly, these recovery programs implement a basin-wide cooperative approach to prevent the extinction of the threatened and endangered fish. Without the basin-wide approach to recovery, the normal permitting process would provide only piecemeal attempts to protect and recover the threatened and endangered species and would be costly for municipalities, farmers, and industrial users. We brought together a diverse range of stakeholders that include the Department of Interior, the state of Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, Wyoming, tribal governments, non-governmental organizations, and water and power users. We've worked together to address one of Colorado River's most difficult issues as we face drought, limited resources, and funding shortages. On behalf of our partners, we thank you for your continued support, and I look forward to our future work together. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Mitchell. We will now hear from Dr. Sarah Porterfield, Water Policy Associate at Trout Unlimited. Dr. Porterfield, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Huffman, Ranking Member Bentz, and members of the subcommittee for inviting me to testify today on behalf of Trout Unlimited, or TU. My name is Dr. Sarah Porterfield, and I am the Water Policy Associate for TU's Western Water and Habitat Program. TU has worked with ranchers, farmers, and a broad variety of stakeholders across the West to use the best available science to confront the challenges of extended drought. Today, I am speaking in support of the Open ET Act and the Saline Lakes Program Act. The Open ET Act would implement an Open ET data program at USGS for delivering satellite-based evapotranspiration, or ET, data to water users. TU supports the Act for three main reasons. First, Open ET is an innovative technology that helps meet the challenges of a changing climate. Open ET uses best available science and publicly available data to increase access to satellite-based ET, or consumptive water use information, for farmers, ranchers, and water managers at the scale of individual fields. More accessible ET data can provide the tools needed to confront the extended drought the West is currently experiencing. For example, TU is partnering with ranchers and researchers in Kremlin, Colorado. This collaborative project is evaluating Open ET as a tool to track reductions in irrigation water applied on high-altitude meadows. Encouraging early results show Open ET as an accurate way to measure ET, and the previously fallowed fields are recovering well when returned to irrigated conditions. Second, Open ET democratizes data across all water users. Data is derived entirely from publicly available datasets. Open ET synthesizes this data and makes it easily accessible with the intention to help level the playing field between growers and regulators, who often have very different data about water use. For example, the Rosedale Rio Bravo Water Storage District in California's Central Valley built a groundwater accounting and trading platform using Open ET data. This platform lets landowners track their own annual water budget by parcel to inform irrigation and crop management, and helps Rosedale track the water budget for the entire district to help balance its groundwater supply and demand by 2040 as required under the state's Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. Third, Open ET is timely in light of the significant funding for water infrastructure and water conservation between the pending Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and Build Back Better reconciliation framework. Giving Open ET a long-term home at USGS could help inform getting federal resources to the ground for climate resilience and water security benefits. For example, in Harney County, Oregon, a community-based water planning effort will be able to use Open ET data to support innovative approaches to decreasing groundwater use while sustaining the economy and ecosystems of the Harney Basin. The Saline Lakes Program Act provides the USGS with resources to conduct scientific monitoring and assessments of saline lake ecosystems in the Great Basin. TU supports this additional capacity at USGS for three main reasons. First, saline lake levels are declining across the Great Basin. Declining river and stream flows into the lakes disrupt ecosystems that support trout, migratory birds, and other wildlife. Shrinking lakes expose toxic windborne dust that threatens public health and economic vitality of nearby communities. These issues are only expected to worsen with climate change. Second, the economic impacts of further declines in water levels at just one saline lake, Great Salt Lake, are wide-reaching and severe. A Great Salt Lake Advisory Council report found that continued drying of the lake could result in economic losses between $1.5 and $2 billion per year, as well as the loss of over 6,500 jobs. Dust mitigation work is expensive. For example, at Owens Lake in California, dust abatement work is estimated to cost $3.6 trillion by 2025, and Great Salt Lake is far larger than Owens Lake, 19 times larger, in fact. Third, saline lakes support important ecosystems. They provide a network essential to migratory birds across the Great Basin as part of the Pacific and Central Flyways. In addition, understanding the dynamics of freshwater flows and how these contributing rivers and streams connect with saline lakes is critical to native fisheries conservation. Finally, TU supports HRES 320, recognizing the critical importance of tribal access to reliable, clean drinking water. TU has collaborated with tribes on several water rights settlements and recognizes that final adjudication or settlement of those claims is not, and should not be, a prerequisite to providing reliable, safe drinking water infrastructure to federally recognized Indian tribes, Alaska Native communities, Indigenous Hawaiian communities under federal trust and treaty obligations. We also support HR 5001, reauthorizing the Upper Colorado and San Juan River Basins Recovery Act. TU appreciates the leadership of the sponsors of these bills and the attention given by this committee to Western water issues. I thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you, Dr. Porterfield. The chair now recognizes Mr. Moore to introduce our final witness.
He's last on the list of witnesses, but number one in our hearts, Mr. Joel Ferry. Thank you, Chair Huffman and Ranking Member Bentz, again, for holding this hearing today. I'm really honored to introduce one of my esteemed constituents and one of Utah's great legislators, Representative Joel Ferry. Joel was born and raised in West Crane, Utah, adjacent to the Great Salt Lake. Today, he serves our home state in the legislature and runs his family's old ranching and farming operation in Corinne. He has also spent his life serving his community in a number of official and unofficial capacities. Having grown up and worked on and around the Great Salt Lake, Representative Ferry knows its needs and challenges better than anyone. He's a good friend, and I'm grateful he can be with us today. Mostly, I'm confident that his perspective will prove valuable as we consider this important bill before us. And as I mentioned earlier about the important stakeholders, he will be somebody that will be a reasonable-minded individual that can have a broad perspective to provide valuable input. So again, thank you for being here, Representative Ferry, and I yield back.
Mr. Ferry, welcome to the subcommittee. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. And good morning, Chair Huffman, Ranking Member Bentz, and committee members. I appreciate and thank you for the opportunity to testify to you today in support of HR 5345, the Saline Lakes Ecosystem in the Great Basin States Program Act. So I am Representative Joel Ferry. I represent House District 1 in the Utah State House of Representatives. And it's a pleasure for me to be here with you today. My family has been farming next to the Great Salt Lake in Box Elder County for more than 120 years now. I'm the 5th generation, and our land and our way of life are intertwined with the lake and its wetlands. That's why I'm supporting and applauding Representative Moore's recently introduced legislation. This is good legislation for these saline lakes. Our farmland borders miles of the Bear River, where it flows into the delta that feeds the Bear River Bay, the Bear River Migratory Bird Refuge, and finally entering into the Great Salt Lake. And as a 5th generation farmer on this land, my family and I work hard to maintain the wetland habitat that benefits the land and the environment. Our fields often fill with flocks of white-faced ibis feeding on the bugs, ducks and geese foraging on corn and other grain stubble during the late fall. These birds and other species need more than just Great Salt Lake to survive, often relying on other water bodies throughout the Western Hemisphere, especially these Great Basin saline lakes. Despite natural variations in water flow over time, we are seeing a long-term decline of water levels at Great Salt Lake, as seen in some 150 years of data. Just this year, the Great Salt Lake hit the lowest water level ever recorded. Great Salt Lake provides recreational, wildlife, and business benefits. It generates more than $1.32 billion in economic output annually for the state of Utah. Also, the lake effect benefits snowpack to the nearby mountains, contributing to the ski slopes and water supplies. Yet we've seen that when other terminal lakes, like California Owens Lake, lose their water supplies, the harm can be costly, exposing dust that can harm the health, damage crops and property values. Here in Utah, our leadership recognizes the need to be proactive when it comes to the lake. In 2019, I joined other legislators in unanimously adopting the concurrent resolution to address declining water levels of the Great Salt Lake, known as HCR 10. This legislation was also signed by Governor Herbert. Keeping our watersheds, rivers, and lakes, like the Great Salt Lake, Utah Lake, Bear Lake, healthy and functional is critical for Utah's future. It's also a critical factor in maintaining working farms and ranches that are the backbone to our rural communities. It's no simple feat in the face of increasing population, projected water demands, warmer temperatures that all lead to increased evaporation. Yet Utah's agencies and leaders are exploring policy ideas and practical opportunities for reducing water consumption while also identifying the technical studies and data needed to find the best possible way forward. That's why bipartisan legislation is so important. HR 5345 sets the stage for providing resources to develop technical and science-based information and data that local managers and stakeholders can use to inform water management decisions and balance trade-offs. This legislation directs the USGS to work with other federal, state, local, and tribal agencies and other stakeholders to conduct a regional assessment of saline lakes in the Great Basin. And I firmly believe in using science and technical data to make good decisions. We rely on science and data to make our farming operation sustainable, assessing crop yields to determine how our fields are performing, analyzing nutrient levels in crops to decide what fertilizers to apply are all important factors in our daily business. The assessment and monitoring effort envisioned by this legislation can help inform Utah and our neighboring states about what is happening in the western saline lakes and what actions could help conserve them for generations to come. I would urge you to support this legislation that will protect saline lakes, wildlife habitat, farms, and ranches like mine throughout the western United States. Thank you for the opportunity to testify to you today.
Thank you, Representative Ferry. I think you and your Utah colleagues are smart to want to get ahead of this issue and talked about the problems with dust abatement and other problems in the Owens Lake Basin. But in California, we also have the Salton Sea as an example where many of these problems are challenging us. So well done. We'll now bring it back to the members for questions, and I'll begin by recognizing myself, and I'll start with Dr. Sarah Porterfield. So Dr. Porterfield, two of the bills that we're considering today involve federal support for research partnerships. One is the Open ET program, and the other is the Saline Lakes Ecosystem Program that we've been discussing. Could you explain to us a little how these research partnerships actually translate to on-the-ground benefits in real communities? What's it look like? How will this help conditions on the ground?
Thank you for the question, Chairman Hoffman. Yes, Congress should certainly encourage multi-stakeholder processes and provide adequate funding for cost-effective programs supporting cooperative solutions, as these bills do. Working with diverse coalitions of interest can help advance innovative changes to water management across large river basins by getting buy-in for all stakeholders and finding collaborative solutions.
Right. And how does that help us better respond to the challenges of climate change?
These programs will provide the best available science, as Representative Ferry pointed out, right? Using good science to inform decisions is how we get the best possible outcome, and also helps to bring together diverse stakeholders in order to find common sense and win-win-win solutions for everyone.
Okay, we've been talking about the Open ET platform, a collaborative partnership that I think you're quite familiar with. Tell us a little bit more about that collaborative effort and why this bill, HR 4832, will help ensure that that can continue and grow.
Yes, thank you for the question. The Open ET team has been working closely with USGS for the past 6 years from the very beginning of this public-private partnership, along with many other partners and stakeholders. And Open ET incorporates USGS's CBOT model and relies on other incredible contributions from the USGS team, as well as from other cooperating partners. And HR 4832 directs USGS to coordinate and consult on the Open ET data access program with relevant relevant federal agency and program partners, including institutions of higher education, states, private sector entities, and NGOs. And housing this program in USGS will give it the resources and the ability and support to grow and expand to meet a wider variety of needs.
Thank you. So unlike every other Western state that has been managing groundwater for a long time, the state of California is just getting around to it. And we are trying to come into the 21st century on a resource that in many years can be 40% of our state's water supply. So it's very, very important. And I know that California recently announced a data sharing partnership for better accounting of groundwater resources that'll be critical to achieving our policy objectives in our state. And it uses data from OpenET. So can you describe the benefits of using this data sharing partnership and other applications on things like groundwater, and especially in places that are impacted by drought?
Yes, certainly. Thank you for the question. Yes, the data from California's partnership can certainly help groundwater sustainability agencies comply with the State Sustainable Groundwater Management Act there in California. The OpenET partnership has developed use cases. You can read about all of these on their website, and there's a number in California. One of these is the Rosedale Rio Bravo example that I mentioned earlier. And throughout the West, these use cases show the value of the data to support sustainable land and water management and drive more wide-scale adoption of innovative water management solutions, such as the Rosedale example that I pointed out that is using it to bring their groundwater in use into balance by 2040 under SGMA.
Excellent. I will yield the balance of my time and hand it over to Ranking Member Benz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And it's a very, very interesting conversation. My questions also will be for Dr. Porterfield. And just as an aside, a matter of note, the Harney County space is very familiar to me since my family has lived in Harney County for 110 years. And so the fact that these techniques are being used there is of great interest. But I'd rather turn my attention to Southern Oregon right now. There are 4 counties that are being inundated with invasion by Mexican cartels to grow marijuana, and they're all stealing water, and they're stealing water at the expense of any number of Harry and David, for example. Everybody's heard of Harry and David around Christmas. Does not have the water it needs for its pears and apples, and goodness knows what impact this is going to have upon folks' Christmas tree arrangements. But the point is, the water is being stolen by people who are breaking the law at every level. Do you see a opportunity for OpenET to act as a means of measuring that which these folks are stealing?
Thank you for the question, Congressman Benz. I believe OpenET is a data sharing platform, and it's available to all of the public. And so therefore, this allows anyone to access data for evapotranspiration, standard for consumptive water use, to be able to see where that use is occurring. So this data platform can provide information about water use throughout the country.
Right, but I'm not sufficiently familiar with it to know if you have to aim the satellite at a certain space, or do we get this data for every square foot of the Earth?
This data at the moment is available in the 17 Western states. And with this program being housed in USGS, that will give the program the ability and support to expand across the country to places like the Midwest, the South, the Northeast. But in the West, yes, now you can go to the platform now and zoom around and see what consumptive water use in ET looks like across the West.
Let's go to the situation. When I was the chair of the Oregon Water Resource Commission, there was many discussions about water measurement and much resistance to it. Does this device now render those concerns moot because we can measure water use using this OpenET methodology?
What this program, this platform does is give everyone a level playing field, right? This is one way to measure water use, and it's a way that is open to everyone based on publicly available data sets. So it's a platform that one can choose to use for free to access this water data and to access water measurements, and provides that democratization of that data so that this kind of data is available to everyone.
I'm always worried when I hear the word democracy used. It reminds me of the River Democracy Act that one of my senators is bringing. I would suggest it's borderline definitional theft, but that's another conversation for another day. Let's go back to the precise or not nature of the device, OpenET. Should we go to somebody and say, hey, we couldn't help but notice when we looked at the open and democratically available data that it appears your water right is X amount, and from our calculations, you've been diverting twice that. Does this open ET lend itself to that kind of use?
As Ms. Trujillo said, right, this is an open, available platform that allows everyone to access the same data. So your individual irrigators have access to the exact same data that regulators do as well. And so it's opening up this data for everyone to take a look at. It's an information sharing platform. It's not a regulatory tool in and of itself.
Right, and forgive me for focusing on the regulation. What I'm really trying to get at is how precise is the measurement offered by the device? That's what I'm really asking. In your opinion, is it sufficiently precise to go to court and prove that someone's taking more water than they should?
I'm not a lawyer, so I won't comment on going to court. But it is in early promising data. It is accurate. It's been ground truth with on the ground measurements. It's an accurate form of measurement, which is something that we need in order to address drought sufficiently throughout the West.
And I agree with you. These tools, these are good tools. The challenge always is how they're going to be used, and then the concern that that they may not work to the precise nature that we would like. And with that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
I thank the ranking member, and will now recognize Mr. Moore for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank Representative Bentz as well. My questions are going to be geared to Representative Ferry, my guest today for our witness. I hope he's ready for the hard-hitting questions that I'm going to hit, that I'm going to present to him today. No, the thing I love about this the most was sufficient Utah-based stakeholders really interested in this. They already started this process by establishing a council, and there's a concurrent resolution that they've already been supportive of that we'll talk a little bit about. But this is just one of those opportunities where I got to see something going on in my state, and I'm going to play my role here at the federal government, and I want to lean in. But the real work has been done by folks at our local level. The Senate President, the Speaker of the House have both reached out to me about this individually. A lot of industry leaders and everything. But I think the best part though is it finally got Joel here to offer to tour, take me on a tour, maybe up to his hunting club in the wetlands region, and even nab a few ducks that we'll treat very well. And I'm excited for the city slicker to get out into this part of that town, that area. Joel, take us behind the scenes of the, after the concurrent resolution that everybody that was supported in the state legislature. Take us behind the scenes and share with this committee how interested local stakeholders are, both public and private, are in this situation.
Okay, thank you, Representative Moore. And I can tell you that this issue, the Great Salt Lake in particular, has risen to be one of the most important issues facing the state of Utah today. And this is an issue that's not just impacting Utah, but numerous Western states and the entire Western region. In Utah, we have taken efforts. We have invested in the lake. We recognize the importance it is to both the local economy, but also to our local environment. The Great Salt Lake provides a stopover for literally millions of migratory shorebirds, from ducks and geese and shorebirds and other waterfowl species. And in the state of Utah, one of the main economic drivers is that's derived from the lake is mineral extraction. There are 4 critical metals and minerals that exist on the lake that have been identified as critical by the United States government. They're all being mined and extracted from the Great Salt Lake in a way that is sustainable and renewable. And through that, we have a large economic driver. In my testimony, I mentioned that the Great Salt Lake, we derive over $1.3 billion of economic activity from the lake. And so we have made significant investment and effort. And we recognize this as one of the biggest challenges that we face with record growth, with water use, with drought, a changing climate. All of these things have all combined to make a major impact. And we're trying to address those. And I applaud these efforts because I recognize that I think that this truly is a regional crisis that we're facing, and it needs attention paid from the federal level.
In addition to that, I've been out on your farms with you. I've seen the work that you and your family does and others in that region. Can you just speak to any of the agriculture sort of impact that this would have?
Absolutely. So one of the major functions that these systems provide is A lot of these are located in rural areas. You know, where my farm is, it's a relatively rural area. And these rural economies are based on agriculture, working landscapes. And so we've actually, my cattle go out and graze on these wetlands. There's thousands of cattle, other producers, other areas that graze on these wetlands, and they're an economic driver. They really, and we've developed methods to be able to graze invasive species that are coming in and other things. And like I said, working landscapes are critical. It's not just the river dumps into the lake and all of a sudden the salt starts. There's these freshwater intermittent areas that are very productive that we utilize.
Thanks. We often hear of recovering attorneys. I'm a recovering management consultant, and I use the term stakeholder way too much. We always did it in many of our projects. But to add some clarity, though, like there is real warrant in how many stakeholders there are in Utah that are interested in this. Can you just kind of give us a sense for, just even define a few of these, give us a broad sense for who all is actually really involved and interested in this?
I can tell you that the list of
Who could work
stakeholders.
with USGS, and who could even work with USGS on this?
Well, boy, I have 8 seconds. From the
I know the chair. He fudges things a little bit. He's on this bill, so he might even give us a little extra time.
So as far as stakeholders, it's a wide range. I mean, local cities, towns, agriculture community is very, very interested in this. The ski industry, the mineral extraction industry, the brine shrimp industry. We have recreational. I mean, believe it or not, but you know, taking a sailboat out on the Great Salt Lake is one of the main activities that happens out there recreationally. And so you have this really broad. This is a unique experience, a unique opportunity that we have, where we bring stakeholders from all spectrums, from the agriculture communities to recreational, water users, cities, counties, across the spectrum. Everybody in Utah is interested in this. In northern Utah in particular is interested in this. And again, the efforts that have been taken, the support that exists there, the resources that we as a state have dedicated towards this show the demand that exists and the need to fix and try to address this problem. And I can tell you right now, one of the biggest challenges that we have, and that this bill addresses, is the lack of information, the lack of the baseline that we need to be able to establish where are we and where can we go. That's what we need, and that's what this bill provides.
Awesome.
All right. I thank both gentlemen from Utah, and I understand that Mr. Fulcher may be with us and may have some questions. Mr. Fulcher, I want to recognize you if you did have questions.
Oh,
but I do not see Mr. Fulcher on the screen. So I think at this point, we'll wrap it up. I do want to thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their questions. Members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we'll ask you to respond to those in writing. Under Committee Rule 3.0, members of the committee must submit witness questions within 3 business days following the hearing. The record will be held open for 10 business days to allow for responses. If there's no further business before the committee, and seeing none, then without objection, the committee stands adjourned. Thanks, everyone.